Hi to everybody who's joined today. I am delighted to be here. So a little bit about me, as Fergus said, I was previously Chief Strategy Officer at BDO before joining Withers and Rogers, and have also spent part of my career working in operations. So I've definitely had that experience of moving from operations into strategy, and that has been a fascinating opportunity and one that I have really enjoyed. I also have other speaking opportunities, I sometimes guest lecture at Warwick Business School, and I've also written on this particular topic for the FT. Okay, so the agenda today and the next slide. I am a fan, a lover and a preacher of strategic thinking, of helping businesses transform, grow and succeed. And I really fell in love with strategy when I did my MBA at Warwick Uni a few years ago. And why did I love it? Well, I loved its possibilities. I loved that I could be creative and I didn't need to be constrained by the confines of the here and now. I found it liberating and energizing, and I still do. I love what I do, and my objective today is to try and inject you with some of my passion and enthusiasm on this subject. Now, we all strategize. We strategize when we do the food shopping. We strategize when we buy a new outfit. Strategizing is thinking about future events and the intended and unintended consequences of our decisions to help ensure optimum results. Now, you won't find that quote on Google. That is purely my interpretation. But one question for you to hold in your mind as we go through the next couple of slides is, what is your opinion of strategic thinking? What examples can you think of when you strategize in your role? Because strategically thinking and thinking strategically is crucial to transformation. And in today's world, businesses have to transform. So we're going to look at three areas highlighted on this slide here in terms of three key areas to help boards transform. So number one, strategic context. Number two, juggling short-term decision-making with longer-term transformation. And number three, just a critical one here, asking the right questions. You can never ask the wrong question. You can just sometimes give not the best answer. Okay, so the next slide. Conceptual thinking is a big topic, but it really ultimately is the ability to understand a situation or problem by identifying patterns or connections and addressing key underlying issues. As a leader, communicating conceptually definitely raises the bar. And many leaders I've worked with are very analytical and structural. That kind of left brain thinking is likely to have been what's got them to where they are today. The good news is that as well as that, every leader also has the capacity for conceptual big picture thinking. You just need to learn how to pay attention to your intuitive thoughts. So don't instantly analyze creative thoughts or over process. And there are 5 things you can do as a leader to elevate that transformational strategic thinking. You can ask those provocative questions. You can push the envelope, push the window open. You can think long term, and you can look to develop trust and then stand back and analyze the situation. And you can use modeling. And this slide is a great example of that. There's been some things gone slightly wrong with the imagery, but I'll bring that to life for you. So the importance of a strategic context and understanding the environment in which you're working is helpful in terms of having that background when you're then working on the more immediate needs of your own business. So what this slide actually looks at is, what is the global environment, so that orange segment to the top left hand side that might be impacting your business? What's going on at that global level that you need to be aware of? In terms of the right hand side, what's the more immediate economy in terms of where you're working? What might that mean in respect of the decisions that you make? Who are your competitors, the bottom right-hand side and the dark grey segment? And what are your competitors doing? What are you doing to remain relevant and to keep up with them? And finally, on the left-hand side, what is your own strategy? How are you going to respond to make sure that you continue to remain relevant and deliver what your clients and people need? So if we move on to the next slide now, whether we are aware of it or not, we do hold rational maps and models in order for us to make sense of the world. Life can hit us all at once. We've all experienced that in the last few years. So we do need to simplify it. We need to simplify what's going on around us to truly make sense of it. Otherwise, we can get overwhelmed. And a good example of that is data. And that is very much the thinking behind Anzof's model, which I'm sure many of us are familiar with. But how do we start with modelling? How can we as leaders use modelling to help us understand our strategy, understand our people, understand our culture? Well, the simplest way to model our world is to start with a sheet of plain paper and just draw a line across it. Straight away, you're starting to create a segmentation within terms of how you're going to write your lists or think about things. We can then add another line in order to form a matrix of 4 quadrants, which is the favoured approach to modelling around the world by academics and business consultants. Just think about the Boston Consulting Group, for example. And these axes will be those factors that are perceived by us as managers and business leaders, and then based on our feel of what's happening in and around the business. So this is an example of the art of strategy, as it requires us to use our subjective assessments as we look to the future and use our imagination. One of the most important examples of that is Anzof's matrix. Modelling is another way of communicating, of storytelling, of uniting us and breaking down unhelpful tensions, and also providing clarity. And I think in today's agile working world, providing clarity to people and having that common sense of understanding is really, really important. Modelling is so simple and yet can be so impactful. And we can all do it, and it can become one of your favourite ways of communicating, I can assure you. So if you take the model on the screen right now, this was one that I developed in response to the pandemic to help the business I was working for at the time to think through the various priorities and decisions that needed to be made. So thinking about the incident, which in this particular example was the pandemic, thinking about how we were going to respond in the immediate term, some of the do now things that we needed to do, whilst then being mindful that fairly quickly we would need to think about recovery, restoration, and reimagination and reform, the more medium and longer term. And I think many businesses did incredibly well in terms of thinking about that immediate, but where that competitive advantage lies is being able to juggle that with a longer term mindset and outlook. What modelling also did in this example was increase the hope for the future. At the time when the pandemic hit, I think many people were shocked and concerned, and actually elevating your thinking to the future can provide some of that hope. It also made sure that the decisions we made today wouldn't impact us in the future in a necessarily negative way, that those implications were considered. And it helped communicate the vision to our people at the time and made them feel part of the change and the cultural needed to endure. So we move on to the next slide. Juggling short and longer term agendas can be challenging. Thank you. So I always find it useful to start thinking at that elevated level first, so that funnel area. Because once you start thinking through your firm's risks and creating your risk register, that's a helpful way of navigating that. It keeps you on that higher plane, on that higher level of thinking, but it also makes it practical and useful. The minute you get into the weeds, into the minutiae and the detail, it can be difficult to elevate your thinking again. So my recommendation would always be to start in that elevated plane. And as a leader, asking a business about their wider risks, getting your members of your teams to scenario plan and think through the mitigating factors, the unintended consequences, businesses is really helpful in building greater resilience and managing what we've all become more common and familiar with in recent years, that the unknown unknowns. So this next slide, so this Venn diagram enables us to look at strategy, operations and transformation. And I think when you look at those three areas, it's culture in the middle that is critical, because culture is the very essence of an organisation. Businesses need to continue to enhance culture on an ongoing basis. That's something that I'm very alert to and familiar with in my current role. And why do we need to do that? We need to do that so that our businesses remain a great place to work and a great business for our clients to work with. Withers and Rogers understanding our fundamental reason for being, our heartbeat or soul, has been critical to this. That's why we've spent time in the last 9-10 months understanding who we are, what we want to be, how we want to behave with each other, and how we're going to get there. So understanding our core purpose and our values, because having a clear set of values agreed and understood by everyone in the firm is a contributing factor for driving success. And although having values is important, they will only deliver the business value if they're meaningful, focus on delivering shared benefits, are role modelled from the top, and are non-negotiable. So values must be at the core of our culture at Withers and Rogers, and should be used actively to help us as leaders make judgments, work through dilemmas, and make strategic decisions and do the right thing. So in respect of that, you can see how that is absolutely aligned then to strategy, where we want to go, how we're going to get there, being respectful of our people, taking our people with us so that we can transform, so that we have that culture and ability to be able to change. And then finally, having the people and the mindsets to be able to actually do the doing and getting the change happening. So this next slide, in terms of modelling, I'm talking about modelling earlier, is our model at Withers and Rogers. This is our strategic framework that we have put together. And I'll just bring this to life for you very, very briefly. Because when you put together a strategic framework, there are many components that you could have. You could have a vision statement, you could have a mission statement, you could have lots of different things that resonate and are meaningful for you. For us, we believe that there were 4 key component parts to our strategic framework: our purpose, our vision, our values, and our strategy. And why they're such critical bedfellows to us at Withers and Rogers can be brought to life in a boat analogy. So just to use that as an example, if you're going on a journey and you decide you're going to go on that boat journey together, your purpose is the reason why you get in the boat in the first place. Why are we all going on this journey? What is that glue? What is that thing that is holding us together? Our vision is the destination. What does great look like? Where are we trying to get to on that journey? Our values are then the behaviours that we display on that journey, so that is enjoyable as it can be, so that we actually have some fun along the way. And then our strategy, that is the course that we plot to help us get to that destination as quickly as possible and as successfully as possible. And that, the strategy, the course that you plot, is the most dynamic part of this strategic framework. Whilst your purpose, your reason for getting in the boat is enduring, your vision you might tweak, but ultimately you've already picked your destination. Your values, you know how you want to behave. It's your strategy that needs to remain dynamic. In the example of this boat analogy, it would need to be dynamic because the weather might change and you might have to plot a slightly different course. Some of your crew members in the boat might get sick and you might have to adapt and use different members of the team. So you can see how strategy needs to remain dynamic. And we can help a business to remain dynamic and think through those critical complexities as and when they arise by asking questions. It's important that as leaders we ask open, probing questions to open up new possibilities. Closed questions typically will stifle conversation and encourage groupthink often and stagnation. We're much more interested in asking the what, how, when, where, why, and who questions, and then thinking through the unintended consequences of those answers and decisions. Because that all leads to cultural implications in terms of how you're going to engage with your people to get them behind those decisions that you make. So the next slide is going to bring together another model that I've developed and used fairly frequently within the firm to help highlight how you can ask questions of a business nature that elevates that thinking, that opens that mindset to new possibilities. Again, I created this just a couple of years ago at the beginning of the pandemic to really help in terms of that earlier model, think through the more medium and longer term consequences and opportunities that we might want to face. And then more recently, since joining Withers and Rogers, it has been incredibly helpful to getting under the skin of the business and understand what is important to our leaders so that we could then engage with our people and create our strategic framework. So just to bring this to life very quickly for you, there are three key component parts. They're not, there's not intended to be any hierarchy here. I'm not suggesting that strategic considerations are more important than management considerations. It's just in terms of that funnel effect, this seems to be a much more logical way. So asking those strategic questions around risk, what are our risks? What are we going to focus on? What do we need to manage in terms of those unknowns? What is the global impact of what's going on around us and how might that affect our business and how should we be responding? What will be important to us and our key stakeholders? What are we going to prioritize as a consequence of that? And longer term, where do we want to get to, that vision? What do we want to be known for? And that has been purposefully chosen, that question, because to be known for something, your people have to be saying it, your clients have to be saying it, and the market has to be recognizing it and saying it. And finally, you know, what is your growth strategy and how might that have changed dependent on your answers. In respect of the operational considerations, we start to get a little more inward facing into the business and we think about how are we going to work, what's going to be important to how we connect with our people, which is really interesting now in this agile working world. How do we feel that sense of culture? What is it, the temperature checks that we're going to use to help us to understand how our people are feeling and responding and keeping important parts of our culture alive? What is operationally going to be effective for us going forward? What do we want to work hard to maintain and retain, and what do we need to adapt? And then in respect to technology, I think that in terms of strategy, most businesses have to have some kind of strategy approach to technology. How can that enable our business? How can that help? And then at a management level, then what is that purpose? What is that sense of belonging? What is that culture that unites and brings us together in terms of that common cause and helps us move the business forward? And how are we going to collaborate with each other? Interestingly, particularly in professional service firms, collaboration has been really critical to that kind of tacit knowledge transfer, that ability to be able to upskill each other. And we historically have done that through overhearing people in meetings, observing conversations on the telephone, having those challenging one-to-ones, and that's more challenging now in an agile world. So it's about how do we do that then? How do we enable that tacit knowledge transfer in a more agile working world? How do we upskill each other and how do we communicate? And we can absolutely do all of that. We just need to think a little differently and work a little harder.